Perhaps one of the most difficult aspects of outdoor and landscape photography has to do with simplicity, but more specifically, how do we simplify a busy scene? Or I guess the more common phrasing is how do we create order within chaos? And this isn't something that's specifically relegated to just woodland photography either, although that is the genre where you most commonly hear this topic. But I used to completely avoid busy or complicated scenes and opt for more simplistic and clean situations that were easier for me to photograph. But once you practice these techniques, it'll quickly open up an entirely new world of photographic possibilities for you. And in this video, I want to share with you some of those very techniques that have helped me out and really improved my ability, and most important, gave me confidence from a compositional perspective when it comes to simplifying a busy scene, whether you're framing up a seascape, woodland, or even a mountain-focused composition. Now, one of the big reasons why fog and mist and low-lying clouds and atmosphere is considered the great equalizer when it comes to simplifying a busy scene is because of what it does to the background. It's because what it does to the area that is behind your subject. And this is a great example here. One of my favorite images from 2022. And as you can see, there is some nice, this actually wasn't fog or mist. These were low-lying clouds that were just kind of blowing through from time to time. But it added just enough softening. And what's really cool is if you look at this image right here, this is captured just a few minutes later once that the clouds blew by. But the difference between these two images is absolutely off the charts. But if you pay attention to the area in the background here in the image that has the fog or the clouds, and then if you look at this one here, look how much more chaotic it is. You have a hard time even separating these branches of the tree from these branches of the tree in the background, but the fog softens everything up and creates that separation that is really needed in order to pull this image off. And I shouldn't say 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, the vast majority of the time, the background or the area behind your subject, that is what is going to create that chaotic or that busy feeling. And that's why fog is the great equalizer with a chaotic scene. And once again, this is the image with the good atmosphere, and this is the one without, and the difference is just absolutely huge. So what do you do when you don't have the fog? You don't have the great atmosphere, no mist, no low-lying clouds. What do you do? Because we can't obviously control that. There are some things that you can do in order to soften down that background or maybe create a situation where there's good separation from your subject in your background. And one of the easiest ways to do that is by just using a shallow depth of field. And this is a good example right here. And I wish I had this image shot with like F11 or F16 so you could see how chaotic this background is. But I'm sure you can kind of tell that there was a lot going on behind this mushroom. But by you opening up my aperture all the way and just focusing on the mushroom itself, and you got these nice flies on here, all this beautiful texture, and then the background is completely out of focus. You really can't make out any of the structure, any of the trees or the leaves or the branches or the twigs or any of that chaotic mess that is behind this mushroom. And that creates a very simplistic photograph. And you don't have to open up your aperture completely all the way. This is a good example here. Another one of my favorite images from this year where everything in the foreground is tack sharp, perfectly sharp focus. But as you kind of drift off here into the background, you can see how things start to get a little bit softer. And I shot this, it wasn't at f 1.8 or 2.8 or anything like that. I believe this was at f8, but it was just enough to create that sense of depth from the foreground all the way through to the background and just kind of soften this area up. And all of this area back through here, granted, the low-lying clouds definitely help soften that up a little bit, but by also using a shallow depth of field, that also just kind of removed a lot of that distraction and created a much more simplistic background of the scene. And that takes me to my next point, and that is just focusing on what is behind your subject. Because like I said, the vast majority of the time, the thing that is going to create that feeling of chaos, that feeling of a busy scene or a complicated scene is more than likely going to be behind your subject. It's going to be in the background of your scene. So by paying attention to what is behind your subject, that will also just help you to create a more simplistic photograph. This is a scene from Acadia where I just loved all of these boulders right through here in the background. Of course, these super vibrant, bright white birch trees and the autumn colors. And having these boulders in the background created separation from the tree to the boulder, because it just, like if you just imagine that those boulders weren't there and those boulders were just more trees, this scene would just look very, very chaotic. But those boulders scattered through here just creates that separation that's really needed. So paying attention to what's behind your scene. Another image from Acadia. One of the things I love about Acadia is the beautiful trees, and there's just giant boulders everywhere on these rocky cliff sides. It's absolutely fantastic. But this is just another good example here. Dead tree and this tree right here. I love the kind of juxtaposition of these two. But this massive cliff face behind it created that separation. But if this cliff face and the sky wasn't here and it was just more woodland behind it, you wouldn't get that separation. So paying attention to what is behind your scene is, I should say what is behind your subject, is absolutely imperative to creating that separation that's needed to make your subject pop. And the background can be completely, I feel like I keep using the word separated over and over, but create that separation between the subject and the background. Now, sometimes there's just not a lot you can do in a situation. So when I say that, sometimes there's just no way that you can create a simplistic scene out of complete chaos. I can't tell you how many times, especially in the southeastern part of the US, we are filled with tons of woodland areas that are extremely chaotic. And no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to simplify a scene. And a great technique that has really helped me out is to stop looking outward. Stop looking everywhere like this and start looking down and put on a longer lens and focus on a very, very intimate scene. So this is a great example here. There is nothing exciting or amazing. This happens almost every single morning somewhere, but just a little bit of dewdrops on this blade of grass right through here. But I absolutely love this image. And like I said, there's nothing fantastic about it, but this is a very simplistic and a very focused image. Once again, same thing, just focusing in on this texture right through here and all of these patterns in this tip of this leaf, and how it kind of falls off using a shallow depth of field really isolates this area and makes it the star of the show. And once again, shallow depth of field, everything behind it is out of focus, blurred, and it creates a very focused composition. So eliminating the noise, getting rid of all the other distractions that are around your scene and just focusing down is a great way to just create a more simplistic image in scenes that you just are really struggling with. This is one of my favorite fall images from, once again, there's so many images from Acadia in this video that was done completely by accident. That wasn't on purpose at all. But I remember this scene very vividly. There was this nice path winding through this beautiful kind of autumn woodland area. And no matter what I did, I spent a half an hour trying to come up with an interesting composition using this path. And I really, really struggled. And I kind of gave up, took a couple exposures, but then I started to walk back and I saw this scene on the ground. In this scene right here, I threw on a long lens and just kind of put my tripod right over the scene and pointed the camera down. But this scene here, I would have completely missed if I was just so fixated on everything else that's out there. So whenever you're struggling in a very chaotic area, don't forget to look down, because there's a good chance that there's a way to tell the story of that area just by a little pocket, a little tiny beautiful vignette that is on the ground. And I absolutely love the way that this one turned out right here. Now this next thing is, or next tip or suggestion, yeah, I guess it's a tip and a suggestion. It's something that I simply call creating space. Now, this is a lot of fun to do, but I think it's a very, very small detail, but it makes all the difference in the world. So this is one of my favorite images, once again, from Acadia National Park. There's a trend here. Lots of my favorite images that are from Acadia in this video. But what's interesting about this is an extremely chaotic photograph, and this is generally not the type of scenes that I like to go for. But I spent so much time trying to create space between as many of these boulders as I possibly could. And if you kind of just take the time and just look through here, you can see that there is water between almost all of these. Now, there was some situations where, like this one right here, there's a little bit of water right through there, so there is space there. But like this stone right here, there was no way I could create space between that one. There was no way I could create space between here. But I spent so much time getting high, getting low, moving to the left, moving to the right, angled down, angled up, trying to find the situation where I could create as much space between each one of these stones that were sticking out of the water. Because converging lines, when things start to overlap each other, that creates a sense of chaos. That creates a very chaotic or an uneasy feeling in a photograph. But if you take the time to try and figure out how you can create space around as many things that are in your scene, that's going to naturally create a more simplistic photograph. Here's another image here from the Blue Ridge Mountains, where I spent, once again, a ton of time trying to figure out how I can create as much space. I wanted to see as much of this whitewash as I possibly could of the water flowing through. There was one area right through here that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get space there. and still get space in all the other areas. This is the best I could do. But being able to see as much of this water and creating space between everything was very, very important to creating a little bit more of a calmer or more focused image, is by avoiding those converging and diverging lines. And now just one more example right through here. And this is a good example of background, because this area that's just behind these trees, there was this completely large opening. And I guess that would be considered the midground of the scene. The trees are the foreground, that big opening is the midground, and then another layer of trees in the background, along with the sun peeping through here. But creating that space, of course, these two trees have got nice space. There was space to the left, there was space to the right, there was space behind it. And just framing this up to where there was as much space as possible around the subject definitely creates a more simplistic photograph. Now, another thing that's really, really simple to identify is color contrast and color separation. They're kind of the same thing, but whenever you have contrasting colors, that's naturally going to separate your subject from your background, or your background from your subject. And this is a great example of it right here, where there's just a lot of green and a lot of brown, but this tree right here, these bright oranges, and then of course everything down here, this tree naturally separates itself from the background. But if you can imagine that if all of these leaves on this tree were gone, or if all of the leaves on this tree were green, this tree would just completely blend in with the background. So color contrast and color separation is a great technique, or a great quality to look for, because that will automatically create separation in a scene. One more example of this is a very old photograph, but a good example of it. Everything in this photograph is pretty much white, but this tree is a completely different color than white, and it creates that separation from everything else in the photograph. Now, there are a couple things that you can do from a post-processing perspective that can create a little bit more simplistic photograph, or create order within chaos. And one of my favorite things to do is just something that I call burn it down, which is, dodging and burning is darkening. And you basically just darken down the areas that you find to be chaotic. And this isn't my favorite image in the world, but I do like it. But it's a good example of it. This is a fully edited photograph, and this is the raw file here. So this is the full edit, and this is the raw file. And you can see what I did. I brought the crop up to here, and I darkened down this entire area, because there's just a lot going on here, and it doesn't really add to the overall photograph. And I think that this version right here looks much more focused, much more simplistic than this right here. And this is a good example right here. What I love to do is, let me come up here to the develop module, is I ask myself, what areas are A, a distraction, and B, not serving the photograph, or not adding any kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Anything positive to the overall scene. And for me, this whole area right through here, there's nothing super exciting going on. So what I'm gonna do is just make the image a little bit smaller on my screen, come up here to filter, let's do a linear gradient. I'm just gonna just drag this across this area right through here. I want to create a nice kind of feather, so pull it up to about right there. I think looks pretty good. And then we'll just kind of just darken this down just a little bit to about right here. Let's toggle this on and off just to see how that looks. So we could even make it a little bit darker. We could even bring this up just a little bit more, because I want to kind of darken down that area some too. Maybe not quite that dark. Let's toggle this on and off. That's before and after. Before and after. There's also another area up here that maybe I want to darken down a little bit. Let's do a radial gradient right through here. Kind of bring this over. Could angle it up just a little bit, and pull it back some, and just kind of darken this area down just a touch. And if we toggle all of these on and off, let me zoom back in to a full screen here. You can see the difference that makes. It's very subtle, but it's basically you're just darkening down the areas that are a little bit chaotic, that aren't adding any value to the overall photograph, that could possibly divert the viewer's attention from the areas that you really want them to look at. And dodging and burning, specifically burning, darkening those areas down, is a great technique to try and get the viewer's eye to avoid certain areas of a photograph. So burning it down is a great technique to simplify an overly chaotic scene. So those are I believe 7 things that really helped me out over the years to create a more simplistic photograph, because I shoot a lot of woodland, a lot of waterfalls that are shrouded by trees. And you got to really focus, or I should say, you got to really, pay attention and take your time when kind of framing up these types of scenes in order to try and simplify an overly busy photograph. And these 7 techniques are things that have definitely helped me out over the years, and I really hope they will help you out as well. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as humanly possible. And if you enjoyed the video, if you could, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you checking out this week's video, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.